class. Today we will study on chapter 2, which is cardiovascular system. So this is the overview for chapter 2, in which you guys will learn about the heart structure, the heart circulation, cardiac cycle, conduction system, and also the blood flow, the pressure, and also the blood resistance. So cardiovascular system, also known as circulatory system or vascular system, is built to rapidly transport the blood to every living organ or living cells in the body. And there are two main elements that important in cardiovascular or circulatory system, which are the first one is the muscular pump, which refer to the heart, in which the functions of the heart is to generate the pressure in which to move the blood throughout the body, okay, by pumping. And next is the blood vessel. And blood vessel, you have know there are three types of blood vessel: the artery, the vein, and also the capillary. In which the blood vessel, of course, it is referred to the transport tube that help to distribute the blood throughout the body. So let's look further on the structure of the heart. So first, the heart is actually enclosed by a double wall sac that we call as a pericardium. Pericardium has 3 layers. Okay, we will look on it later, in which the functions of pericardium is of course to protect the important organ, which our heart, and to anchor the heart in place, and also to prevent the overfilling of the heart with blood, and also to allow the heart to work in relatively frictions-free environments. Okay, so as you can see here, this is the structure of the heart. Okay, that's it. More details on the pericardium. So pericardium has 3 parts. The outermost part is referred to the epicardium, known as epicardium, the outermost layer of the pericardium. And then the middle part is known as myocardium. And then next is the inner part of the heart wall is known as endocardium. Okay, so endocardium is made up from the epithelial tissue, which is endothelium. Meanwhile, the myocardium in the middle part is made up from the cardiac muscle. Meanwhile, epicardium is made up from the epithelial tissue. So here, okay, we have endocardium, myocardium, and also epicardium. Okay, this is more details on the layer of the heart wall. You can look by yourself later. And next is that another thing that you have to know about the heart is that the chamber and the vessel inside the heart. So as we all know, the heart of human consists of 4 chambers. We have 2 atria in the upper parts of the heart. Meanwhile, we also have 2 ventricles, the lower parts of the heart. And the atria and also the ventricle is separated by parts that we call as a septum. Okay, so there are 2 types of septum. First, we have interatrial septum that will separate the atria between left and the right atria. Meanwhile, next we have another septum, which is interventricular septum, which separate between the left ventricle and also the right ventricle. Okay, let's look more details on what is atria and also ventricle. So atria is the receiving chamber for blood returning to the heart from the circulations. So meaning to say that the parts that will receive the blood from the lung, either the lung or the other parts of the body, is referred to the atria. Okay, so minimal contraction to push blood into ventricle. So in order for the atria, either left or right atria, to push the blood goes to the lower part of the heart, which is the ventricle, they only need a minimum pressure or a minimum contraction. Okay, that's why atria is very thin. The wall of atria is very thin because they don't need a high pressure to push the blood. Okay, meanwhile ventricle um, is referred to the discharging chamber of the heart. Okay, meaning to say it is the part where it will not remove, it will pump out the blood from the heart. Okay, the function is to pump out the blood from the heart, and between atria and ventricle there is a part that we call as a valve. Okay, valve is actually to prevent the flow back of the blood from the ventricle into the atria. Okay, so next is that this is the structure of um, the heart. Here we have left atrium in the upper part, and then we have right atrium. Left ventricle. And then here we have right atrium, and then the lower part is referred to the left ventricle. Okay. So right atrium over here, the blue one, receive the blood from the body. Okay, let's start from the oxygenated blood. Okay, you have your lungs, right? Your lungs is you respire, you breathe in the oxygen, and the oxygen will goes to the blood vessel, and the blood vessel carry the oxygenated blood will goes to the pulmonary vein and send the blood to the left atria. Okay, so left atria is the first part of the lung that of the heart that receive the oxygenated blood, and then it will push the blood towards the left ventricle, and blood from left ventricle will pump out from the heart through the aorta, goes to the parts of the body, the other parts of the body, and there is exchange of gases will happen, and then it will send back the deoxygenated blood through the vena cava to the right atrium, and then the right atrium pump the blood, the oxygenated blood, to the right ventricle, and right ventricle will left the heart through pulmonary artery. Okay, so there are two types of valve that you have to know. The first one is atrioventricular valve. Atrioventricular valve is located between the atria and also the ventricle, meaning to say the valve, okay, that prevent the flow back of the heart from ventricle back to the atria is known as atrioventricular valve. There are two types of atrioventricular valve. The first one is tricuspid. Tricuspid valve is between right atrium and right ventricle. Meanwhile, bicuspid valve is the valve that between the left atrium and also the left ventricle. Meanwhile, semilunar valve is located between the ventricle, left and the right ventricle. Okay, left and right ventricle, leaving the heart. Okay, as you can see over here, this is the first one and this is the second one. Okay, it prevent the blood from flow back into the ventricle. Okay, here is more details. Okay, here left atrium we have bicuspid valve, and then kita ada left ventricle, and then the blood will goes out through aorta to the other parts of the body. Here we have another valve here, and then okay, we cannot see from here. Here also tricuspid valve, the one valve that prevent the flow back of the blood from the right ventricle to the right atria. Okay, here you can see by yourself later. Here, okay, this one you can look on your slides, your own slide. And then next is another structure of the parts that important is the chordae tendidae. So chordae tendidae is the heartstring, that the one that will help to hold the the valve, okay, either tricuspid valve, bicuspid valve, or semi-lunar valve, okay. Therefore, it will prevent the valve here from moving into the atria during the ventricular contraction. Okay. So as you can see here, first what will happen? The blood returning to the heart. Okay, they will fill the atria. This one is oxygenated blood, goes to the left atria. Meanwhile, the blood, the deoxygenated blood, will enter the right atria, and then here during this time, the atria is what we call it one contract. Therefore, it will push the ventricle and cause the ventricle to open. Thus, when the ventricle is open, what will happen? The blood can goes into um, the ventricle. Okay. Then what happen? After that, it will close. Okay. The valve will close. The tricuspid or bicuspid valve will close. Okay. And then what will happen? The ventricle, left or right ventricle, they will contract, and this part will be atria will be relaxed. Meanwhile, ventricle contract, thus pump out the blood to the other parts of the body, to the lung or to the other organs. Okay. So in in the heart, there are three types of circulation that you have to know. Three types of blood pathway. Okay, the first one is pulmonary, the second one is systemic, and the third one is coronary. So what is pulmonary circulation? Pulmonary circulation is actually a circulations of blood between the lungs and also the hearts. Okay, so meaning to say between the lung and also the heart. Okay, so let me explain to you by looking at this figure. So what will happen? Your lung will respire in the oxygen, right? And the oxygen will be diffused into the artery over here, and the blood will receive oxygen, and the blood will become oxygenated blood. The oxygenated blood will goes to the heart, the left part of the heart, okay, through pulmonary vein, okay, through pulmonary vein, and it will goes to left ventricle, and ventricle from the heart of the ventricle will send pump out the blood to the other parts of the body. And then here, as you can see here, the deoxygenated blood will pump out from the right ventricle, okay, through the pulmonary artery. Thus, pulmonary artery bring the deoxygenated blood that contain carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide will diffuse out into the lung, and and the human will breathe out the carbon dioxide. Okay, so the circulation between the heart and the lungs is referred to systemic circulation. And another one, second one is pulmonary. Second one is systemic circulation. Systemic circulation is the blood circulation from the heart over here, okay, starting from the atrium, left atrium to left ventricle, goes to the aorta, and then it will goes to the atrial, and then here what will happen? It will goes to capillary, in which blood capillary is a place where the exchange of gases will be happen, in which oxygen will go to the organ, and then the organ will diffuse out the carbon dioxide, in which they will be absorbed by the capillary, and then capillary will send out into the venules through the vein, which is the vena cava, send back to the heart, and from the heart to the other parts of the body, that one we call as systemic circulation. Okay. Meanwhile, for coronary circulation is referred to the circulation of blood within the heart itself. Okay, so what happened here? Of course, the heart itself is an organ, right? So the heart also need oxygen to keep operating, to keep functioning. Okay, so coronary circulation is to supply the heart tissue with the blood. Okay, as what you can see here, the artery will supply the blood in for the heart is called as coronary artery. Okay, meanwhile, um, vein is the one that will remove carbon dioxide from the heart back to of the heart back to the heart itself. Okay, so remember, artery supply the blood, coronary artery supply the blood, meanwhile supply the oxygenated blood. Okay, meanwhile the coronary vein will discharge, okay, the deoxygenated blood from the heart tissue. Okay, this one you can look by yourself later. Next, we have to know also about the cardiac cycle of the heart. So what is cardiac cycle? Cardiac cycle is referred to the heartbeat. Okay, so all events that associated with the blood flow through the heart during one complete heartbeat. So when your heart beats, the first two atria, okay, right atria and also left atria, the upper parts of the heart, they will contract together and they will relax together. Okay, contract meaning dia akan mengecut, relax dia akan back to normal shape lah. Okay, then the two ventricle also the same, they will contract together at the same time and relax together at the same time. Okay, so the contraction of the heart muscle, we call it as a systole. Meanwhile, the relaxation of the heart muscle, we call as a diastole. Okay, so the heart contract or beats about 70 times per minute. Okay, in which the normal adults normally 60 to 80 beats per minute. Okay, and then let's look on the cardiac cycle. Okay, remember diastole is referred to relaxation, systole is referred to contraction. So to be easy, I will explain through the figure here. Okay, first is that starting, let diastole. Okay, remember diastole mean relaxation. The first one that will relax is that the atria, left and right atria. When left and right atria is relaxed, so what will happen? This part will be filled with the oxygenated blood and also with the deoxygenated blood. Okay, and then they are in relax. Next is systole, atrial systole. Atrial systole is referred to the contraction. Systole is contraction, contractions of the atria. When the atria is contract, mean magnitude, it will push the oxygenated blood from the left atria to left ventricle. Meanwhile, it will push the deoxygenated blood from the right atria to the right ventricle. Okay, now is that what will happen? The valve, tricuspid and bicuspid valve is open during the flow in of the blood, and then what will happen? The valve will be closed due to the isovolumic ventricular contraction. Okay, and then next is that what will happen? the parts, the left ventricle and right ventricle, they will contract, thus produce what we call as a ventricular pressure. Okay, ventricular pressure will help to give a, an enough pressure to push out the blood from to push out the blood leaving the hearts. Okay, and then next what will happen is that um, the the valve will relax again, okay, due to the isovolumic ventricular relaxation. When the valve and when the atria is relaxed, and thus the blood will fill in back into the system, and when the atria push, what will happen, the valve will open again. Okay, this is the cardiac cycle lah. Okay, this one you can look on it by yourself later. And then next, the cardiac cycle will produce a heartbeat, right? The heartbeat that usually sounds as a loop doop. Okay, loop doop is one heartbeat. Loop doop, loop doop, loop doop. Okay, so the loop sound is when the atrioventricular valve is closed. Okay, atrioventricular valve closed is referred to the tricuspid and bicuspid valve, the valve between the atria and also the ventricle. And the sound of doop is caused by the close of the semilunar valve. Semilunar valve is referred to the valve between the ventricles and the aorta, and also the pulmonary artery. Okay, you have to remember that one. So there are two things that cause the what we call it, the faulty in the heartbeat. The first is what we call as a heart murmur. The heart murmur is often due to ineffective valve, which allow the blood to pass back, meaning to say the valve is not really close, and it causes the blood to flow back to its original position, to its original place. And next is rheumatic fever. Rheumatic fever is fever that caused by bacterial infection, and it also can be one of the reason of the human having a faulty valve that cannot function very well, particularly at bicuspid valve, the valve between the left atria and also the left ventricle. Next is conducting system. Okay, so in the heartbeat, there is a system that controls the heartbeat, not the control, to what we call that one, to help to run the heartbeat in our body. Okay, so this one we call as the intrinsic control. Intrinsic control, they involve what we call as a nodal tissue. Okay, a nodal tissue has both muscular and nervous characteristic. Okay, nodal tissue divided into two types: sinoatrial node and also atrioventricular node. So by its name itself, sinoatrial node is located at the atria here. Okay, it's located at the right atrium only. Okay, at the upper part of the right atrium. Meanwhile, atrioventricular node, just look at its names, we know that it is between atria and also ventricular. So the atrioventricular node located at the base of the right atrium over here and near the septum. Septum is a part that's separating between right and also the left ventricle. Okay, so sinoatrial node that position at the upper parts of the right atria, also known as a pacemaker, because it is the one that will initiate the heartbeat in our body. Okay, so when the impulse, okay, reach the atrioventricular node, which is the node between the atria, left atria and also right atria and left ventricle, there will be a slightly delay because they want to allow first the atria to finish their contraction before they start the contractions of the ventricle. Okay, so the signal for the ventricle to contract travel from the AV node through two branches. Here we call it AV bundle. So the node, okay, the signal, okay, the neuron signal from the AV node, it will goes to the AV atrioventricular bundle, in which from atrioventricular bundle it will send the signal to the Purkinje fiber. This one and this one is referred to Purkinje fiber. So Purkinje fiber will give signal to the left, okay, and also the right ventricle to contract, thus pumping out the blood from the heart. Okay, so here is the more clear picture of where is the sinoatrial node. Here is sinoatrial node at the right atrium, upper parts of the right atrium, and then we have atrioventricular nodes between the atria and between the right and atria and right ventricle, and then the signal will goes to the bundle, atrioventricular bundle, and atrioventricular bundle will be separated into two parts, which is goes to what we call as a Purkinje fiber. So Purkinje fiber will send signal to the left and right ventricle to contract and pumping out the blood. Okay, so for the cardiac output, is referred to the volume of blood each ventricular can pump within a minute. Okay, there are two factors will determine the cardiac output. The first one is the heartbeat, which refer to number of beats per minute, and the loop per minute, and also the stroke volume is referred to the amount of blood pumped by the ventricle in a single contraction. So to calculate the cardiac output is that the heart rate multiplied with the stroke volume. Okay, this one you can calculate it by yourself later. Okay. And then let's look more detail on what is the stroke volume. Remember, stroke volume is depend on the amount of blood. It refers to the amount of blood that entering the heart and distending the ventricle. Therefore, the higher the amount of blood enter the heart, the higher will be the stroke volume. Okay, so exercise can increase the amount of blood to enter our heart, meaning exercise good. Okay, and when there is a case where a severe blood loss happen, it will rapidly decrease the stroke volume, thus it will decrease the heart rate also. Okay, and next is the heart rate. So the heart rate, okay, which refer to this one tadi. Okay, the heart rate is referred to number of beats per minute. Okay, our heart rates are affected by many factors. The first one is neural factor. Neural factor caused by sympathetic division that can increase the heart rate by increasing the signal in the sinoatrial and also atrioventricular node activity. And also another one is parasympathetic division that can decrease the heart rate by decreasing, this one is usually during sleep. Sympathetic is during what we call as fight or flight position. Okay, for Parasympathetic, it will decrease the heart rate because they decrease the signal inside the sinoatrial and also atrioventricular node activity. Next is hormone. Hormone also can affect the heart rate, such as epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and also thyroxine that can increase the heart rate. Another one is iron. Okay, so iron, low calcium ion can depress the heart. Meanwhile, high calcium ion can cause a prolonged contraction of the heart. Okay, and next is for potassium. The lower amount of potassium will cause the heart to beat feebly and at abnormal heart rhythm. Therefore, potassium is also important in our blood. Another factor is age. Okay, so um, the one that have the heart rate, the fastest heart rate is referred to the fetus, and our heart rate it will be decreased throughout our life. Okay, so when you get old, your heartbeat will become slower and slower. Okay, next is that gender. Female have a faster heart rate compared to males, and temperature also. When the temperature is very hot, it will increase your heart rate, right? Okay, and when the temperature is very cold, it will so it the heat increase your heart rate, the cold condition will decrease your heart rate. Okay, because due to the decreasing of your metabolism in your heart cell. And then exercise, of course, you know exercise will increase your heart rate because you need to take a lot of oxygen to replace the oxygen that have been used by your organ or muscle during exercise. Next, we're gonna look on the second component of cardiovascular system, which is the blood vessel. I told you before, blood vessel divided into three types: artery, capillary, and vein. So artery, okay, is the one. Artery is the one that carry the oxygenated blood that rich with oxygen, and then capillary is the one where is the place where exchange of gases will happen, okay, between oxygen and carbon dioxide. Meanwhile, the vein, okay, venal is a blood vessel that carry deoxygenated blood, the carbon dioxide rich blood, okay, and only vein have a valve inside the vessels. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, artery here, artery, the largest artery is aorta. The function is to take away the blood from the heart, goes to the organ, and then before it goes to the capillary, it will transfer to arteriole first, and then it will send to the capillary. Okay, so the capillary is very the wall of capillary is very thin because it is the place where diffusion of gases will happen. So it must to be thick enough so that oxygen or carbon dioxide can easily to diffuse in and diffuse out. And the vein is the one that will carry the deoxygenated blood from the organ back to the heart. Okay, so here capillary send to the small vessel of vein first, which is known as venules, and then it goes to the vein, and the largest part of the vein is we call as a vena cava. Okay, and only vein have valve to prevent the flow back of deoxygenated blood, okay, to its origin place. Okay, and veins carry about 70% of body blood and act as a reservoir during hemorrhage. Okay, next we're gonna look on the blood flow, blood pressure, and also the blood resistance. So blood pressure, there are two types of blood pressure. The first one is systolic pressure. Systolic is referred to the contraction. Meanwhile, diastolic is referred to the relaxation. So when we talk about pressure, it refers only on the ventricle, because ventricle is the one that will push out the blood. Okay, so the first one is systolic pressure. Systolic pressure is the contractions of the ventricle, meaning to say dia akan mengecut so that it will push out the blood. So during systole or contractions of the ventricle, the heart muscle will contract and the chamber will pump out the blood. Okay. Meanwhile, the diastolic pressure is when the heart chamber it will widen, it will relax, so it will fill with the blood. Okay, meaning to say they relax so that they can receiving lots of blood from the lung and also from the other organ inside our body. And let's look on the blood flow in artery. So the blood flow in artery, okay, the blood pressure can actually refer to pressure of blood against the blood vessel, the wall of the blood vessel. Okay, selalunya normally our resting blood pressure is about 120/80. So the highest arterial pressure we call as systolic pressure. Okay, peak systolic is referred to the contraction. Okay, is reached during ejection of blood from the heart. So when we want to pump out the blood, the muscle of the heart, it must be contract, mengecut, so that it's easy for them to push the blood out. Okay, and the lowest atrial pressure is called diastolic pressure because during diastolic the heart is in the conditions of relax. Okay, so that they can fill in the heart with the blood. And the thing that there is a tool that to check your blood pressure, you always see this one in the clinic or in the hospital. We call it as a pygmomanometer. Okay, pygmomanometer used to measure your blood pressure lah. Okay, and then next is the blood flow in the vein. So the blood flow in the vein, it depends on three factors. The first one is skeletal muscle contraction. Okay, next is presence of valve in vein and also the respiratory movement. So when the skeletal of the heart, the muscle is contract, as you can see here, when the muscle contract, they will compress. Excuse me. They will compress the weak wall of the vein, and it will cause the blood to move past to the next valve. And then once it passes the valve of the vein, the blood cannot flow back lah. Okay, this one. Okay, next is blood pressure and velocity. So when left ventricle contract, okay, left ventricle is the one that receive oxygenated blood. The blood will send out into the aorta. Aorta will go to the atriole, and atriole will send the blood to the capillary. Okay, what will happen? A progressive decrease in pressure occur as blood move through the artery. Okay, the atrial, capillary, and finally into the vein. And the blood pressure is highest at the aorta. Okay, and it's very low at the vena cava because vena cava is receiving the blood, meaning vena cava is receiving the blood. Meanwhile, aorta is pumping out the blood. Therefore, they need higher blood pressure to pump out higher blood. That's why they produce high blood pressure. Okay. And the decrease in high blood pressure will cause the blood velocity to decrease lah. Okay, this one you can look on it by yourself later. And then pulse. Okay, what is pulse? Pulse is referred to the expansion and the recoil of artery wall. Okay, in bahasa Malaysia we call it as a nadi. Okay, nadi, our nadi or the pulse rate indicates the rate of the heartbeats. Okay, so the nadi point usually we check the cut at the radial artery lah. Okay, you can look by yourself later with this one. And how to measure the blood pressure? Of course, as I mentioned earlier, we measure the blood pressure using a tool that named as a pygmomanometer, and this one you can read by yourself later. Okay, and next is what is the factor that affecting the blood pressure? There are several factors that affecting the blood pressure. The first one is referred to the peripheral resistance. Peripheral resistance is referred to the amount of friction that encountered by the blood as it flows through the blood vessel. What we can say is that the amount of friction in the blood vessel. Okay, so the one that will increase the peripheral resistance is vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction is a condition where the blood volume and blood viscosity will increase. Thus, it increases the friction inside the blood pressure, inside the blood vessel. Next is neural factor. Parasympathetic, it have little effect or no effect at all because we are at a resting condition. Meanwhile, sympathetic division of nervous system will increase the blood pressure through vasoconstriction here. Okay, because kita dalam keadaan nervous, we dalam keadaan berlari dan sebagainya. And next is renal factor, is refer to the kidney. When your blood pressure is increased beyond normal, your kidney will allow more water to leave the body in the urine. That's why when you're nervous, you will easily feel like you want to go to the toilet and excrete your urine. Okay. However, when your blood pressure is decreased, the kidney will retain the body water, thus increasing the blood pressure. Next is temperature. Cold temperature increase the blood pressure because of vasoconstriction. Okay, and warm pressure will increase this one. Warm temperature will decrease your blood pressure due to the vasodilation. And chemical also can affect your blood pressure, such as nicotine. Okay, increase the blood pressure. Alcohol decrease your blood pressure. And then epinephrine will or adrenaline will increase your blood pressure, and also diet. Okay, when your diet low in salt, meaning to say low sodium chloride, NaCl, sodium chloride, and then low in fat, low cholesterol, it will help to prevent the high blood pressure. That's why it's good for you to eat less salty food, less fat food, and less cholesterol food, so that you can have a good blood pressure. And then when we look back at the peripheral system, the peripheral resistance here. So peripheral resistance, okay, as I mentioned earlier, it refers to the amount of friction passes through the blood vessel, and there are three important sources of the resistance. The first one is blood viscosity. Blood viscosity is referred to the thickness of the blood. The greater the thickness of the blood, the less molecule will slide past one another, so less friction. Okay, and then next is total blood vessel length. So the longer the vessel, the greater will be the resistance. Last but not least is blood vessel diameter. Okay, so the smaller the blood vessel diameter, the greater will be the friction. And fatty plaque from the atherosclerosis of sometimes cause turbulence in the blood flow and increased resistance due to the turbulence. So I think that's all for today, class. Thank you.